We're going to start things out here with a guest tonight. He is a free market economist and anarcho-capitalist associated with the Austrian school. At least, Dr. Walter Block, that is what Wikipedia says about you. How would you describe yourself?
That's a pretty good description. Thanks for having me on your show.
Well, welcome to the program tonight. We basically had you on because of popular demand. Normally don't have guests here on Free Talk Live, but a lot of people were asking for you. And so I finally broke down and decided to make this happen. So I'm glad you're here, and I've got your book in my hands. Unfortunately, I've never had the chance to read it quite yet. It's in my stack of 2 reads, but it is just it is one of those books that is really outrageous looking. Defending the Undefendable. What is this book, Dr. Block?
Well, it's really just an attempt to promote the libertarian philosophy. And the libertarian philosophy is predicated on 2 basic premises. One is the non-aggression axiom. The non-aggression axiom just means keep your mitts to yourself. Don't be putting your fingers in your neighbor's pocketbook. Don't be putting your fingers around his throat. Mm-hmm. The second axiom of libertarianism is property rights, because we need property rights, because if you're putting your fingers in your neighbor's pocket, you might be innocent of a crime if he stole stuff from you yesterday and put it in his pocket and you're just returning it to yourself. So we have to have a theory of property rights, which is based on homesteading and voluntary trade. So that's sort of libertarianism in a nutshell. And what I'm doing in this book is defending all sorts of people who are hated, reviled, people are disgusted at them, they're called criminals, but they don't violate the libertarian axioms. And as long as they don't violate the libertarian axioms, what they do is sometimes disgusting, and sometimes I wouldn't want it done to me, or I wouldn't want to engage in it myself. But my thesis is that it's improper to make criminals of them, like they might be engaging in victimless crimes, not real crimes.
So, I mean, just to give our listeners some idea of what we're talking about here, you list in the book a number of different types of people that are just reviled by many people around the country, around the world. I mean, people like prostitutes, pimps, blackmailers, ticket scalpers, and money lenders. I'm picking some of these out here. A slumlord. I mean, what would you have to say about a slumlord?
Well, what is a slumlord first? A slumlord is a person who engages in renting slummy buildings. Mm-hmm. And if you engage in the rental of slummy buildings, the question I ask is, are you per se violating the libertarian axiom? And I can't see my way clear to thinking that you are, because assuming no fraud, in other words, you're not renting something at luxury levels and, it's really a rat hole. But, the tenant comes in and sees a rat hole and says, okay, I'll take it because the rent is very cheap. Well, that's what a slumlord does. The slumlord rents slums to people, and then do-gooders and lefties and people who don't know any economics come around and say, aha, this is a slum. You're exploiting your tenants. You're not giving them hot and cold running water. There are rats here, or whatever it is that makes up for the slum. And the answer is, well, yeah, that's true, but he didn't violate the libertarian axiom. He didn't pick up his fist or a gun and smack somebody with it or shoot somebody with it. So
you're saying that a slumlord isn't committing any sort of crime against humanity or anything like that because he's operating on a completely voluntary basis. He may be a scumbag. He may be a lowlife. And his tenant, the tenants may be less than pleased with the deal they ended up deciding to get themselves into, but they made that choice. Is kind of what you're pointing out here?
What it really boils down to is, even for someone who doesn't really understand the libertarian philosophy, it's just a contractual agreement. And if both parties are clear on the terms of the contract, I will rent you this disgusting rat hole with no running water in exchange for $100 a month, then there was really no crime committed.
Right. Hey, you sound pretty good.
Thank you.
You sound like a libertarian. You've got it. I wouldn't call them scumbags, although many people do, but these are the do-gooder types. I would just say that he's an honest businessman renting a very low-level, low-quality product. But, there are other
Sometimes, I mean, to be fair, though, not that I've ever lived in a slum, but I do have the understanding that some landlords are better than others at, say, fixing some of the problems with their buildings, regardless of what level they're kept up at. But if you've gotten into a rental situation and someone has told you they're going to be taking care of things as a landlord, and then they decide to make you wait a month before they fix the hot water, that kind of thing, I think those are the types of people who tend to get labeled as a slumlord, and that is kind of scummy behavior, not taking care of your property.
I would say that's fraudulent behavior, and fraud is a form of theft. In other words, if I sell you 10 pounds of potatoes and it turns out there are 10 pounds of rocks in the bag, in effect, I've stolen your money. And that's fraud. But let's take somebody who sells, crap or rocks or slummy apartments, and, you ask, well, will you be fixing the hot water? And the guy says, no, take it as is, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's not fraud. It's a very low quality service, but... well, look, suppose I sell you rotten bananas. Rotten bananas are pretty lousy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Unless you're
you
making
ask, well, are they rotten? I say, you're darn tootin', they're rotten. But I'm selling them to you for a penny a piece or some very low price. Well, why am I a scumbag? Why aren't I just selling you crappy stuff or bad stuff? And by the fact, as Julia said, that both parties agreed, we can infer, if we're economists, that both parties gain, at least in the ex ante sense. So there's nothing untoward going on here. There's nothing scummy or scumbaggy or whatever the word is. It's just selling low-level, inferior merchandise.
So, Dr. Block, do you have a website of your own that you like to promote, or is there somewhere our listeners can go to visit you online, perhaps read your writings, that sort of thing?
Well, a lot of my writings are on the Mises web, M-I-S-E-S. Just go to Mises.com. Mm-hmm. I have my own website, WalterBlock.com. But the Mises has got a lot more of my stuff than I have myself. For example, they'll probably be picking up this interview, so if somebody misses the interview, they can get it from there.
Okay, great.
But let's talk a little, if it's possible. Let's talk just a little bit more about the slumlord.
Sure.
The reason we have public housing is because do-gooders were unhappy with what was called tenement housing.
Mm-hmm.
Tenement housing was high-rises, maybe 6 or 8 stories high, railroad flats with maybe cold water, maybe not hot water, and they were relatively safe. People were there. They were, they had no better place to go to. The rents were very low. But the do-gooders decided that this is unconscionable, unacceptable, scumbaggy, if I can use that word. And what they did is they ripped them down, and you know what they did instead? They put up public housing. Which
turned into absolute garbage.
I'm sorry?
Which turned into eventually absolute garbage as far as housing.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely garbage.
And there's an element of force, of course, behind the public housing, whereas with, as you pointed out, with a slumlord, that's all a completely voluntary arrangement. We're all forced by the threat of violence to pay for these government housing projects. Whereas if as you call them, the do-gooders, I don't know if that's necessarily an appropriate term, because they're not doing good, they're doing evil by forcing people to pay for their ideas. If they actually had a good idea, they could have gone out, funded it themselves, and created their own better apartments that people could have had at affordable rates. But that's not how they work. All right, we bring back Dr. Walter Block. You're in Louisiana, is that right?
I'm a professor at Loyola University, New Orleans, yes.
Okay, all right, very good. So we're talking about defending the undefendable. It's your book, and it's kind of an older book. In fact, one of our listeners has a question for you. We're going to get to some calls here about what your past was like, Dr. Block, and how you came to where you are as far as your philosophy is concerned. We're going to get to that here in one moment. But first, let's talk to lady listeners first. Margie is in Michigan listening to WTKG. Margie, you're on with Dr. Walter Block.
Thank you. Dr. Block, I'm interested in hearing more about the libertarian view of property rights, because if I live in a nice house and a slumlord buys the house next door to me and decides not to keep it up very well and suddenly I have rats in my house that I didn't used to have, and then my property value goes down. How is that a sort of victimless crime?
Well, if your friendly neighbor brings rats to you, that's sort of like trespass. It's almost like if he were to burn coal, thick sulfur coal, and send the what do you call it, pollution over to your house, that's really a trespass, and that would be a violation of property rights.
That's an interesting question, by the way. A great question, Margie.
Yeah, it's a very, very good question.
What's the libertarian remedy in that kind of situation?
Right. Well, I was getting to it. In my roundabout professorial way, I can never answer a question directly, because if I did, they'd kick me out, so I've got to prevaricate. I'm glad you're laughing. I didn't mean that seriously. You don't really own the value of your house. For example, if hippies move in next door and they don't do anything of a pollution-type thing, it's just that they look hippie-ish, and the value of your house declines, well, that libertarians would not count as a property rights violation, so it's sort of tough on you. However, there are libertarian remedies, and the remedies are restrictive contracts or condominium contracts. What you do is you, let's say I have a 5-mile square and I'm going to put in 3,000 houses. And what I do is I don't sell you just the house, but I sell you the house and membership in a condo. So you can't get somebody next door who's going to paint his house pink and blue polka dot, or be too hippie-ish, or whatever it is that you think will lower your property values. So in economics, this is sometimes called external diseconomies, where somebody moves in next door and see if it's loud music, that's very, very loud music. That's a property rights violation, like noise pollution. But there are always continuing problems. A guy has a party Saturday night and it's a little loud, and, what about that? Well, that's why you have condominium associations and restrictive covenants, to protect yourself against neighbors who can lower your property values, even though you don't own your property values. You only own the physical sanctity of the house, so to speak. So,
Dr. Block, would you say it's kind of a buyer beware situation, where if you are somebody who privacy is very important, quiet is very important, being able to know what colors your neighbors can paint their homes is very important to you, then it behooves you to do your due diligence and research the areas that you're looking to move to, and find something that is suitable, rather than just throwing caution to the wind and buying a house in some sort of unrestricted area, which is, of course, what I like to do, because I like to have the freedom to control my property.
Well, I think one of the important things to point out here is that when we're talking about libertarian philosophy, we're talking about living in a society that's completely unlike the one that we live in right now, where there is a real